Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on theory and methods, focusing on modernity and late modernity. In our previous video, we looked at one side of the theoretical debate that society has moved into a postmodern era. In this video, we're going to look at other perspectives on that debate. Some sociologists would suggest that we've not moved into a postmodern era and that we are still in an era of modernity, whereas others would suggest that we are neither in modernity nor postmodernity, but rather a unique time somewhere between the two, referred to by some as late modernity. But first of all, we need to define what sociologists mean by modernity. Modernity is usually typified by a period following on from the Enlightenment project, a movement away from religion towards science and from the divine right of monarchs to republics and democracy. But the modern era is probably most evident in the period following the Industrial Revolution in Western Europe, with mass industrialisation and urbanisation. This period is argued to extend through to the 1970s, but some will suggest that depending upon location it still exists in contemporary society. Modernity is categorised by its structural approach to society, and functionalism, which identifies with the modern era, focuses on the role of social institutions, social structures such as class, and social processes such as socialisation being of heightened importance. Some of the key features of the modern era were defined by Bell and Newby in the 1980s. They saw the mass industrialisation and urbanisation as being a catalyst for the modern era, with the growth of towns and cities, people moving from rural areas to look for work, as economic production in society shifted from agriculture to manufacturing. The era is also typified by the growth of capitalism and the increased ownership of private industry. It sees the growth of the middle classes as the ruling classes needed compliant workers to manage their assets such as factories and mills. And this provided the backdrop for a lot of early sociological theory, with the likes of Marx, Weber and Durkheim examining the changes in society and proposing new ideas and theories that came to be the basis of sociological inquiry. Indeed, it was Weber who attempted to define the era of modernity further. He suggested that modernity was not only typified by industrialisation and urbanisation, but by changes in our social attitudes. Weber highlighted the movement from spirituality towards scientific rationality in the towns and cities, and the use of scientific thought in employment to achieve the most efficient ways to achieve financial goals. He also suggested that there was a gradual secularisation of society or decline in religious beliefs, but morality remained stable. Weber also described the role of bureaucracy in the modern era as a necessity. With the growth in large organisations being used to organise society, these needed to be controlled efficiently and effectively. In the modern era, we see a lot of huge organisations doing this, such as the welfare state, the NHS and the education system. Of course, these ideas are also part of functionalist thinking, with the diminished functions of the family being highlighted by Parsons as it moved from the extended family to the privatised nuclear one. So the question is are we still in the modern era? Well, certain features of modernity still exist. More traditional family structures remain, although they may have been slightly adapted, such as Chester's neo-conventional family. Social mobility in contemporary society can be seen to have stagnated since the early 1990s, although this is more due to control over wages than the status of employment. We can also suggest that some of the meta-narratives in society are still relevant. Marxism and feminism continue to highlight social class and gender inequalities in society, while racial inequality in contemporary society can be said to have fluctuated dramatically in recent years. However, Weber's ideas of scientific rationality are evident throughout most institutions. In welfare, employment, education and healthcare, quantitative approaches are used to make judgments, rather than taking a holistic view of a person's social circumstances. Individual differences are often neglected, demonstrating that structural attitudes to human behaviour from large institutions, which we would suggest certainly haven't left modernity behind. But there is evidence of a movement away from the characteristics of modernity towards a different era. Recent crises in capitalism, such as the 2008 global credit crisis and the projected economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, suggest that there are reactions against capitalist ideologies. Anti-globalisation, the Occupy movement and Extinction Rebellion all suggest that there is a growing reaction against the structural nature of capitalism. We also have to question the determinism of class, gender and ethnic narratives with growing individualism and intersectionality. Do concepts like social solidarity still exist, for example? In the UK, there has been an increased polarisation of opinion over key issues, such as Brexit. Would this have been likely in the modern era? And as we saw in our video on post-modernity, there has been an increasing decline in the trust in society's meta-narratives. Lyotard suggested a disbelief of meta-narratives, while the loss of trust in experts and institutions has led to people looking for sources other than mainstream media, politicians or education for answers, which is a clear feature of a postmodern age. However, many sociologists suggest that we are neither in a modern nor postmodern age, but instead an amalgamation of the two, late modernity. Anthony Giddens sees this as being an era of rapid social and economic changes between the two eras, while others such as Beck suggest our society is increasingly categorised by risk. As old certainty such as employment for life, long-term marriages, stability in housing and food supplies become less certain, it gives birth to a risk society, one in which people are more insecure about the future and their prospects. Bauman opts to refer to this era as liquid modernity, an era of fluidity in gender, sexuality, employment, class, education, an era typified by change and increasing flexibility. There are others who propose the existence of an era separate from postmodernity and modernity, such as Castells and Eliot, and you may want to examine their ideas as a bit of an extension. Late modernity has specific characteristics, just as modernity and postmodernity have. There is an increased individualism, much like in postmodernity, with a focus on individual needs, personal goals and aspirations at the expense of more collectivist ideas. This focus on the self comes from increased insecurity in relationships, employment, while greater insecurity comes from the threats to the environment and from science, as evidenced by the recent shockwave sent through society by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's also an era of reflexivity. Individuals are more conscious of their choices and reflect upon their place in society. They react to changes and their personalities adapt based upon their experiences more. The British stiff upper lip of the modern era is replaced by more introspection and thought about individual and social issues. Late modernity is also typified by increased yet impersonal interactions. This can be evidenced through the use of social media and the internet. We are connected to more people than ever before, but in a far less personal way. We are also victims of greater surveillance, with internet usage monitoring details about our tastes, preferences and interests, of where we go and who we connect with, although it can be argued that this is less a feature of late modernity and more of the growth of capitalism. Some of the key thinkers in modernity that we've met throughout the course are Giddens, Beck and Bauman. Most are focused on the impact of late modernity on the personal aspects of our lives, examining concepts such as Giddens' concept of pure relationships and romantic love. We're no longer guided in our choice of partners by collective morality such as church and family, but more by individual preference. This has broken down barriers in who we are attracted to and how we define our relationships. Giddens' concepts of disembedding, changing the face of our connections with others by allowing ourselves to connect virtually, and reflexivity, the ability to reflect upon our actions within the social world, help to explain these changes in relationships. Beck has also focused on relationships, arguing the certainty of the modern era where a male was the breadwinner and the female took on the expressive role has changed. With greater parity in economic power, relationships are now negotiated. Males and females have conditional relationships in the late modern era. Males have become more involved in parenting, according to Beck, as a reaction to the uncertainties of defining themselves by a job role. There is greater security in defining themselves as a father. And Bauman's ideas of fluidity in relationships, sexuality, spirituality and identity help us to understand the changing nature of individual identities in contemporary society. There is a lot of evidence that we are in a late modern society. Increased individualism in society, in part as a reaction to the neoliberal economic policies of the last 40 years, has led to a decline in collectivist actions. We've seen increases in serial monogamy, with the growth of reconstituted families and the increases in divorce and remarriages indicating that a partner for life is becoming less common. Our media usage and the impersonal interactions, both positive and negative, demonstrate that we are in an age of late modernity, while the increased risks from science, such as climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, highlight features of Beck's risk society. We can also see this in insecurity of employment. Zero-hour contracts, self-employment and the gig economy are all features of both fluidity and insecurity in our career choices, which accentuates the arguments that we are living in the late modern era. However, there is criticism of these ideas. Bauman's idea of a fluid society is criticised by those that suggest that class and gender structures still exist. Recent debates have had polarising views, such as the debate over the right of trans women, which would suggest our society is less fluid than Bauman thought. We can also question whether late modernity is a global or a localised phenomenon. Whilst in the West and parts of Asia these features can be easily identified, have other societies rejected the characteristics of late modernity as being cultural imperialism? Furthermore, the likes of Eliot have been critical of the impact of digital technologies, with around 50% of continents like Asia and Africa not yet having access to the internet, accounting for around about 3.5 billion people who are unable to log on. And finally, and perhaps most critically, are risk and insecurity the products of social changes, or are they the products of increased spread and acceleration of capitalist ideas, with employment being more precarious to increase profits, and the risks to the environment being linked to excessive production and global movement of goods? To what extent is capitalism manufacturing risk to serve its own ends? That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on modernity and late modernity. Thanks for watching.